All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair, and this is State of the Braves. Well, guys, Ronald Acuna recently broke Braves social media by declaring that he wants to be a Brave for life. And I am sure that the Braves feel the same way, that they would love nothing more than to make that happen. And I'm also sure that Alex Anthopoulos has already put a master plan in place well before Ronald ever made these comments, right? To make this plan a reality. The best news in this is that Ronald Acuna, in his mind, has a clear desire to be with the Braves. He loves being in Atlanta, and that's the first piece, right? He's not looking to leave. Some people have had these notions that because of his very team-friendly extension that he signed early in his career, that he might be salty about that and want to leave or whatever, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Ronald loves being in Atlanta, and he made that clear just a few days ago. But we can't also ignore the reality that the Braves have already locked up a ton of position players to their core, right? These talented guys, these position players, and those commitments will continue to grow up in price, go up in price over the next several seasons. So that's just the reality. It doesn't mean that the Braves somehow don't value Ronald. It's just a piece of the puzzle into what might a Ronald Acuna extension look like. So the question to me is not if this extension will happen, but how will it happen and when will it happen? All right, so first, let's break down what Ronald has remaining on his current contract, just so we are in a good starting point here. So Ronald will make $17 million per year over the next 5 seasons. That is through the 2028 season. 27 and 28 are both option years that the Braves, team options that the Braves will certainly exercise. $17 million for Ronald Acuna is extremely team friendly. Because of the extreme value of this contract, many have said that the Braves should rip up the final few years of the contract, and that Ronald Acuna should basically, he deserves a totally new deal. First, on that point, the Braves have nothing to apologize for in terms of this contract. I don't think Ronald is asking for an apology of any kind. The Braves gave Ronald $100 million very, very early in his career. He certainly outplayed that contract. He's not the first player to outperform a contract. But this deal was about generational financial security for Ronald's family. He got that, and I'm sure he was happy to sign it in the moment. And I bet he's not harboring any ill will for $100 million. I can assure you guys that. Second, this is not how the Braves operate, just tearing up contracts and starting afresh. It would not be the best thing to do, right? You kind of set a precedent on that, even with Ronald Acuna. So, if they do sign him to an extension, I would expect them to accept the 27 and 28 team options and basically extend Ronald beyond those years. So, of the Braves' current core, where will each player be in terms of their age in their contracts going into the 2029 season? I want to just kind of look at that. So we're painting a future picture for where the Braves will be in 2029, financially speaking, and where these core players will be. All right, so let's just go down the list. Ozzie Albies will be 32 years old, and he actually becomes a free agent in 2027, 2 years before this extension would take place. So Ozzie, if he's going to be around, the Braves are also going to have to extend him. I'm going to get into that a little later. Michael Harris will be 28 by 2029. He makes $10 million in 2029, and that could escalate all the way up to $20 million by the end of his current extension, which goes to 2032. So Harris will be around with the Braves for a while longer. Jared Kelenic, he would be 29. This would be 2028 would be his final season with the Braves. He would be entering free agency. It's his final year of arbitration before this. So that offseason, he could potentially be gone. I mean, if all goes well, we haven't really even seen Kelenic in a Braves uniform outside of the first couple days of spring training. So we don't know how this is going to go. Maybe he has some amazing years and the Braves want to extend him. I mean, there's just so many ifs related to that. I don't know that it's worth talking about too much. But in terms of his current contract, his arbitration years end at the end of 2028. Sean Murphy would be 34 years old at this point. His final club option of $15 million happens in 2029. So that one's kind of interesting. Is Murphy playing at a really high level still at the age of 34? Maybe the Braves have an opportunity to decline that option if they want to create a little more financial flexibility for themselves. Or maybe he's still playing at an all-star level and they wouldn't even think about declining it. We just simply don't know on that one. Matt Olson would be 35 by 2029. He will be making $22 million in that year, and then he would have a final club option in 2030. Of course, he's getting up there in age at that point, but that 2030 option is for $20 million. Austin Riley will still, this is kind of amazing to me, Austin Riley will still only be 32 years of age. We could call that kind of the back end of most players' prime. He will make $22 million per year through 2032. So remember, Riley and Harris are the two Braves that are signed for the longest bit of time. He also actually has a club option for 2033. And again, that one is at $20 million. Spencer Strider will be 30 in 2029. Final club option for $22 million in that season. Unless injury starts striking Strider, I would expect that would be a no-brainer club option for the Braves. And then, of course, these two pitchers, Hurston Waldrop and A.J. Smith-Shawver, they are still under rookie contracts, so arbitration really hasn't even started for them yet. So they will still be under team control. Of course, we don't know if they're going to make it and be regular contributors in the starting rotation or not. But I think it's at least worth mentioning that those guys will certainly still be with the Braves if all goes well. So while most of these contracts escalate each season for these players, Riley and Olson's contracts, is worth noting, do not and will become extremely team friendly if they continue to produce at an all-star level. I mean, that's just the nature of inflation. The dollar today is worth more than the dollar will be in 2030. And so these players making $22 million potentially could be a huge deal. I think especially Riley's deal is incredibly valuable for the Braves. If the Braves need to clear payroll space for Ronald entering 2029, they could do so by letting Kelenic walk. They could decline Murphy's option. After 2030, the Braves are only committed to Harris and Riley. So there is an opening if you're going to commit a ton of money for Ronald Acuna. I actually think the possibility is very realistic to obviously sign Ronald to a long-term extension here. So what does a realistic Ronald Acuna extension look like? What is he worth? Let's just remind ourselves that Ronald just put up an 8.2 WAR season and became the first player ever to record a 40 home run, 70 stolen base season in the history of Major League Baseball. He could do that again, and he could continue to do that again for a number more years. He could become the first ever 50 homer, 50 stolen base player. He could, in 2024, legitimately, he could win a batting title. I mean, there's basically nothing on the baseball field that this guy cannot do. He is the best position player in baseball, period. Okay, so that's just the truth. And he's young, right? He's younger than most players who even start talking about an extension or free agency are. So that's really important to understand. I have heard several analysts throw out that Ronald is worth a 10-year, $500 million contract. So is Ronald Acuna worth $50 million per year? Well, it's not an easy yes or no answer. I mean, I would say he probably is. But no one has ever gotten that kind of value outside of Shohei Ohtani. And even Ohtani's deal, as many of you guys know, is very complicated. And even though he technically got $70 million a year, we know a ton of that was deferred. A lot of people actually value that contract in real dollars as more like $46 million per year. So the deferrals really complicate um, analyzing Ohtani's contract value. So if we go for that $46 million contract and we understand that Ohtani is, at least for a number of years, going to pitch and hit, we recognize that he's kind of his own animal. So you start looking down the list at some other players in recent years, right? And Aaron Judge, well, he got in the high 30s, but he's also much older than Ronald Acuna would be at this point in time. So I go to Sport Track. You might have been to this website before. Sport Track kind of lists off a lot of player contracts and also has some analysis to determine a player's market value. Ronald Acuna's market value per Sports Tracks is $38.4 million per year. But that is also for his present value. And so the tricky part of coming up with a Ronald Acuna extension is you're not extending him for his years now. You are extending Ronald for his age 30 through however long you would extend him seasons. So, most players are still in their prime at age 30, but might be declining by their early to mid 30s, which would include the years that you would be extending Ronald. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. What do the Braves do with extensions in terms of years and age? I mean, we do have to think about what the Braves have done in the past. Basically, what is Alex Anthopoulos' MO? I don't think the Braves would sign even Ronald Acuna through his age 39 or 40 seasons. They don't operate that way. That's the way that a lot of MLB clubs operate, including, of course, the Philadelphia Phillies, who have signed multiple extensions and contracts to players into their 40s. But I don't think the Braves will do that. We've seen through the contract they offered to Freddie Freeman, to the contract they gave to Austin Riley and others, that their comfort zone is kind of age 36, maybe age 37 for unique players. Obviously, Ronald is unique. When committing this kind of money, age regression has to be taken into consideration. They don't do things like the Phillies. Anthopoulos is not going to set up the team for dealing with any kind of player, even an all-time great like Ronald Acuna, who is diminishing into his late 30s and early 40s, especially when you're giving a guy crazy money. They are not going to ignore future aging for present performance. So, what kind of player is Ronald likely going to be when he's 30 years old? Or you could say, let's say the Braves give him a contract through age 37. What will Ronald look like at age 37? Ronald, I think, will still be really great in his prime through the first few years of a deal that would be age 30 to 37, right? He might not be stealing 70 bags a year by his mid 30s, but I would expect him to remain a special power bat through his entire contract. My only concern offensively for Ronald as he ages is his bat speed slowing down a bit with his style of hitting. He doesn't really have a hitch of any kind or a start of any kind into his swing, which makes him so special. But will he be able to maintain that through his late 30s? I mean, it's just an unknown question for sure. But that is a potential problem for him as he ages. Personally, I think that will affect his batting average more than it will his overall power. His biggest regression is likely to be on defense if he loses a step or two. I mean, most guys do. But remember, Ronald has a great arm. Right field, in a lot of ways, in Atlanta's ballpark, is easier to play than left field in terms of having to cover ground. You play the ball off the wall. Ronald has a great arm still. or he should still have a great arm late into his career. So unless his legs totally leave him, I think Ronald will be able to play right field into his late 30s. Obviously projections and you're not really talking about any other potential major injuries because we just can't know if anything like that would happen. So what's my best guess for a Ronald Acuna extension? I'm going to say 7 years, $250 million. That is about $35 million per year. Now, I might be on the low end. I mean, maybe it gets closer to 300 million, and I think it's legitimate to make that argument, to get Ronald more, closer to 40 million per year as opposed to 35. But I think when we talk about, it's not just about what Ronald is worth, it's about what will the Braves be willing to do and recognizing, and I think Ronald understands this, the Braves need to be able to maintain a great team that is going to vie for many World Series and not just pay Ronald. So 7 years, $250 million is a far cry from what some of these supposed experts are saying, $500 million over 10 years, right? But 7 years, $250 million with an 8th year team option of $30 million. That, I think, is a very realistic Braves extension for Ronald. Remember, Ronald is saying he wants to be a Brave for life. I think this is a legitimate contract for a guy who's 30 to 37 years old. And will Ronald be realistic in wanting to stay with the Braves? Maybe the Braves want to go further than this. They are certainly making plenty of money out there in the Battery to up this contract offer beyond what I'm saying. So the key here is value, right? Does Alex Anthopoulos feel the Braves can still round out the entire team to compete for rings when paying one player so much money? It would be outside the norm for the Braves to give a 10-year, $500 million contract to Ronald. They love Ronald. They know how great he is, better than probably anybody, any other group in baseball. But I do think Anthopoulos, no matter what, is going to stay loyal to his approach and not put a single player's well-being above the team's. Now, I've also heard this player jealousy issue, right? Several commentators have voiced concerns that since all the other Brave stars are making about $22 million a year, won't a huge contract that is well above $22 million per cause a rift in the clubhouse? I just shake my head at that. First, I think that shows a lack of understanding about the Braves players, the Braves clubhouse, and the Braves culture. The Braves want to win, and they know that Ronald Acuna is the best player in baseball. They're not fooled by that, right? They know that Ronald with the team gives them the best chance to win, and that's what they care about. You cannot talk me into an idea where Austin Riley somehow is making waves, earning $22 million per year himself, and potentially winning, having the chance to win a World Series every year because Ronald Acuna is on the team. But because Ronald is making 35, 40, even $50 million, he's going to make waves. I just don't see that at all. These Braves players are smart. Everyone knows that Ronald is worth every penny of any kind of contract the Braves are going to give him. They know he is a generational talent. And if anyone were to have a problem with this type of contract, Anthopoulos should just trade that guy immediately because that is a selfish way to view things. Don't worry about what the other guy's doing. Just go out and play your game. Okay, so does a Ronald extension impact other possible Braves extensions? And I'm thinking specifically of Max Fried and even Ozzie Albies. Ozzie is the other guy who, like I've already mentioned, could potentially become a free agent before a Ronald extension were to take hold. So let's talk about these. And I want to talk about them in terms of prioritizing extensions. So Ronald, Max, and Ozzie. Let's prioritize these three. So let's start with Ronald. Ronald is my number one, right? You have to prioritize Ronald first, of course. Okay, so of Max, Ozzie, and Ronald, Ronald is by far the most likely to be extended in my eyes. Ronald projects very well in terms of aging. Just like Olson and Riley, I think Ronald will continue to provide great offensive value, even if he slows down on the field. I think that's why the Braves were so comfortable in giving those guys longer extensions. I also think, and I mentioned this in my last episode, Ronald is showing greater and greater leadership and maturity. I think that's a big deal to the Braves. He's not going to be some kind of problem in the clubhouse. I don't think he really ever has been, but I think that really matters. And you see him growing up in a lot of ways right in front of you. And, he needs to be that guy in the clubhouse. You need your best player to be some kind of leader. It doesn't have to always be the same kind of leader like a Freddie Freeman. Ronald obviously is very different than him. He plays with a lot of passion and joy, and that's another way to lead, and he can certainly do that. But yeah, I think he's going to age well. Again, I kind of already mentioned this, but if he slows down, you could move him to left field, or you could move him to DH, or even part-time DH late in his career if needed, right? If he gets to that age 36, 37-year seasons, that's certainly reasonable. But again, let's not forget, in 2029, this is how young Ronald is. In 2029, he'll only be 30 years old. He still has plenty of years in his prime left in that extension. So he should be able to give you many more years in the field. All right, so my number two for these contract extension candidates is Ozzie. So Ozzie will be 30 in 2027 when his contract runs out with the Braves. Everybody knows that Ozzie's contract is even more notoriously team friendly than Ronald's. I mean, he probably deserves an extension now as well. But he is in a different boat than Ronald. He's not a generational talent. He is an all-star level player at second base. So yeah, he probably deserves an extension close to what Riley and Olson got. Now, can the Braves commit this and extend Ronald to a massive deal at the same time? That is a question that's harder to answer. The fact is, it's much easier to develop a middle infield prospect and replace Ozzie. As much as I love Ozzie, so I'm not saying get rid of him. I'm just saying the real truth of it is you can replace an Ozzie way easier. You really can never replace a Ronald Acuna Jr. And the Braves do have a few candidates in the lower minors that potentially might hit, right? And they might pop in the minors and prove themselves. And by 2027, you have a very obvious replacement for Ozzie Albies. So I don't think an Ozzie extension is going to happen soon. It could, but I don't think it will happen soon. I do think it's worth noting too that Ozzie and Ronald's close friendship matters here. I don't think it's near the top of the list of the things the Braves are considering. But I do think it's a great team dynamic. And if you're going to keep Ronald around for many more years, it might be nice to keep Ozzie around at least for a few more of those years. If Ozzie obviously continues to produce, then perhaps an extension through maybe 2032 or 2033 would be realistic. That would still end fairly early during Ronald's extension years. But again, Ozzie's a little older than Ronald, and I don't think Ozzie's going to age quite as gracefully as Ronald. I don't see that left-handed swing of Ozzie's aging really well. It's just the bat speed is never has never been the greatest, and if it slows down at all, I think it could be a problem for Ozzie. I think that right-handed swing is going to be good for a long time. But that's just how it is. It's easier to replace a second baseman than it is a generational right fielder. All right, so let's get to number three though, and that's Max Fried. And of course, everybody's clamoring for Max Fried to get an extension this year, and I would love for that, but you can't view it in a vacuum. I mean, a Max Fried extension affects other extensions you can give, other money, other players. And obviously, if we want to extend Ronald, I'm not sure both can happen or that both will happen. It does go against what the Braves' MO is, right? If they were to sign a Max Fried extension, the Braves commit most of their money to proven position players. They sign veteran pitchers to short-term deals like a Charlie Morton or like a Chris Sale. and they develop young pitchers who are cheap and are going to continue to be cheap as they develop into their first 5 or 6 years of their career, like a Bryce Elder or a Spencer Strider or fill in the blank. So Max does not fit into either of those categories now. He fit into the first category, right? He was that guy who they developed and has been cheap, but here he is at the end of his arbitration. So Max probably wants 6 to 7 years. I mean, this is his one big free agent contract. It would take him into his age 36 or age 37 seasons. That being said, perhaps the Braves could extend Max and structure it in a way that his final few years kind of de-escalate, right? The final couple years of that contract are maybe cheaper um, while you extend Ronald, right? And his new deal hits the books. The problem with adding a Max Fried extension to the books in 2025 is the Braves want to get under that CBT number. If they continue to be over that number for a third consecutive year, a lot more penalty happens. And there has been some talk, not from the Braves because they don't talk about it, but there's been some talk that the Braves might really be motivated for 1 year to get under that number and reset the penalties. So, how important is it to the Braves? We just don't know. What seems obvious is the Braves are going to have to choose, right? They can't do it all. They're not going to extend Ronald and Max and Ozzie. You're going to have to make some hard choices. And to me, it seems like Max is the odd man out. There is more to Max than just what happens to Ronald and Ozzie. Okay, it gets more complicated than just this. This is just a part of the very complicated decision making that Alex Anthopoulos has to make. Like, do either Smith Shawver or Hurston Waldrop or any other pitching prospects show this season that they can be counted on as a part of the core for years to come? I mean, if no one steps up, then maybe by the end of the year, Anthopoulos is deciding, you know what, we've allowed Fried to get to free agency, but now we're going to go after him and try to keep him here because he is the best option moving forward. Or maybe there are other pitchers out there on the free agent market that again fit into that the Charlie Morton, Chris Sale kind of mold that you can get them for 1 or 2 years on the back end of their careers for cheaper. So again, I just think Max doesn't fit quite as much into what the Braves tend to do. So when is the best timing for a Ronald Acuna extension to happen, right? We want to know about the when. When might this happen? Because I don't think it's if, I do think it's when. Signing Ronald to an extension now impacts the CBT number. Again, I brought this up related to Fried as well. So I don't think the Braves, I don't know if it's the be all end all, but I don't think the Braves would do an extension for Ronald right now because it still could potentially put the Braves into that third tier, and they would have to slide down in the MLB draft several spots, and there's some other penalties to it as well. Signing Ronald to an extension in 2025, I think, is much more likely because you have potentially Ozuna, Max Fried, Charlie Morton, and Travis d'Arnaud all potentially coming off the books. Maybe not all of them do. Maybe d'Arnaud comes back. Maybe Ozuna hits really well this year and they decide to exercise his final year option. But still, you do have potentially a lot of money coming off the books after 2024. So I think that a late 2024 or early 2025 timetable is the sweet spot for a Ronald Acuna extension. It's great to hear that he wants it now. I don't think that means it's going to happen now, but I do think it means it's going to happen. And that is awesome news for the Braves. Ronald has a chance to become one of the greatest players in the history of baseball, not just one of the greatest Braves. And he would stand basically with him and Hank Aaron as the two greatest Braves of all time. A lot has to happen between now and then. He's a young player. He's got basically his whole career in front of him. Last year, I think, was just the picture of what his potential actually looks like. But certainly, every Braves fan should hope that Ronald can be a Brave for life. It may not happen immediately, but I think it will happen, and I definitely think it should happen. So, Braves fans, I hope this news that Ronald wants to be a Brave for life makes you as excited as it does me. I think it's great news. I look for great things for Ronald and for the Braves in 2024. And as we're starting spring training, I think this is as good as you could start a season with this type of news. So, guys, thanks for tuning in for another episode of State of the Braves, and I'll be back soon.